Okay, good morning to you all. It clearly is the point in the semester where people trickle in a little bit later. It always happens. Usually it's sometime in October. I guess you guys are a little early. It's when midterms start, typically. So anyway, we're going to continue on with the world of graphic design, giving you a little bit more in-depth overview of the principles of graphic design and kind of layout techniques, etc. Today you'll actually do an exercise that's a kind of a practice round for your poster for your assignment 103s. We're going to do a small postcard, but it's kind of a good practice. But we'll show some advanced techniques. We'll talk about aligning images and that sort of thing. And then as we move forward, we'll deal with multi-page documents, and we'll start on your portfolios, etc. So today we're going to talk about the structure and organization behind graphic design. So less about the design process and more about the actual physical product that we're creating. So let's start with grid systems. And those of you that were in 121 and you dealt with the Mondrian Museum, it obviously had a lot to do with grid systems, where the column systems were, etc. So there's a direct parallel between graphic design and architectural design. So let's talk a little bit about the anatomy of grids and what kind of makes up a grid. And we'll start with margins, which are basically the space that is around the grid typically. Its purpose is to define the active area of the page. So what actually is happening on the page. We give it a border. This is the area that something is working on. Their purpose is to direct the viewer toward the actual content. And if you do it correctly, the margins kind of go away and we don't notice them anymore, right? They're going to vary in size a lot depending on the format or the desired result. Let's say you're reading a magazine. It might have very, very small margins because they want to maximize the content on the page. If you're writing your English paper and you need the paper to be a little bit longer, you might make the margins a little bit bigger to make the pages a little bit longer. So it's going to vary depending on what the content is. Sometimes they do contain subordinate elements, like footnotes, for example, at the bottom of the page. They might be in the margin. A title, something like that, still may occur in the margin. So they're not devoid of content. They do tend to have some little bits of content in them. So your margin is basically the stuff that's highlighted in blue. It goes around the active content on the page. Okay, and we'll keep coming back to that same image as we talk about it. We move from there into columns, which are relatively obvious. It looks like my arrows are actually off. They should be over a little bit. I don't know if I can. No, I can't. These are the columns. Sorry, those misaligned. They're the vertical divisions of space. They usually align visual elements. They tend to divide the page. You may have multiple columns on a page. And the widths can vary. So they don't all have to be consistent. It depends on what the content is in the design. So these are the columns, right, in a particular layout. Column intervals are the space between the columns. So we have the columns, and then we have the column intervals. And it's sometimes called the gutter width, but we're going to call them column intervals. They're inactive negative spaces that give the columns some breathing room. Right? If you had two columns of text and they were crammed right up next to one another, you couldn't read the text because they'd be competing. With a little bit of a space in between them, with that interval in between, we get the breathability. We can understand them as a column. Okay? They prevent elements from colliding. Right? So it's the space between. Notice in this particular example that they vary. Right? This interval is a little bit larger than this interval, but they're still there. They still divide the page. So there they are in the same layout here. Flow lines are another critical component to graphic design, and they support the vertical columns by dividing the page horizontally. And good layouts use these a lot. They're aligned. This basically is the flow line in this particular page, right? It allows us to stagger. So we have an image here. We have two columns here. The flow line breaks that and allows us to have the large image below with a separate column here. So this is based on a 4-column layout, right? Or maybe a 3-column layout. 1, 2, 3, this being blank. Right? Here we've got the same 3 columns. 1, 2, 3. Right? We have content in this column, nothing here, and then a content here with the flow line going across. So you can have multiple flow lines. It's any point that divides across the horizontal page. Grid modules are spatial areas that support the textual and visual content of the design. Basically, that means these are little squares divided up on the page that then support having content in them, right? They're derived from the flow lines and the margin, the flow lines and the column intervals, right? I can't do them all because then it would look like columns, but you get the idea. It's these boxes, right? If we look at it in kind of a page, I apologize that this is a little bit blurry, right? We have a distinct 3-column layout, right? Each of these images is a grid module, right? Notice that we can span 2 grid modules relatively easily with text. Same thing over here where we span 2. Same thing can happen with an image, right? So it's just a way of dividing the page into a grid that then we can work with, okay? So if we're going to work with a basic grid, we need to do this to unify and order the compositional space. Okay? It's basically going to provide an underlying framework upon which we're going to put all our visual elements, whether it's text, typography, images, etc. They're all going to be laid over this grid. Right? And it helps us to compose the visual elements. It means that nothing is just arbitrarily slapped on the page. Right? And one of the big differences between professional graphic designers and people who are doing it kind of out of the back of their cars and whatever, you want to put a flyer together for somebody's birthday or whatever, is that you're not paying attention to these kinds of underlying principles of organization. And so we're going to try to train you now to get those principles figured out so that you are very good, competent graphic designers, even if it is for your friend's flyer for selling their bike or whatever. Okay? You want to avoid arbitrary grids. The proportions of the grids should be based on the page format and the complexity of the material that you're trying to showcase in that particular layout. So if you're doing your portfolio, for example, which is what you'll do as your final project for this class, you want to think about how much text is going to be on a page, how much space do I need for text, right? What are my images and what's the smallest size of image that I would want to put in that portfolio? And that can help you derive what is appropriate for the graphic design layout. Right? So the functions of grids, you could come up with this list as well. Control, organization, rhythm, right, are big ones. Right? Balance, direction, right? You could create some kind of contrast as well, order, movement. We start with the most basic, which is a single column grid. It's perfect for very large amounts of continuous text. So you're writing your history paper or you're writing your English paper, chances are it's going to be a single column grid, right? One big column of text because it's all text, right? Even in books, right, which may be a smaller format, they tend to be just one column of text. Right? The space is therefore defined by the margins, right? And that's going to divide the active area and the inactive area of the page. Right? The margins tend to need a little bit of adjustment, right, from the standards depending on how you're trying to format it. Right? The classical single column grid, the sides and the bottom, right, tend to be rather large. The top tends to be a little bit smaller in margin. The inner margin, assuming that we have facing pages, which means 2 pages that are folded together, the inner margin is typically half the width of the outer margin. So the outer margin is a little bit larger than the inner margin. The positions of the text are mirrored across the spread. Right? So the left page is mirrored to the right page in terms of where the content belongs. Right? This is a really neat little graphic, the grid system how-to. This is specifically dealing with the initial layouts. And clearly the projector is cutting off the top. I'm going to have to adjust that. So it deals with the golden ratio and how you can actually divide the page and figure out where the text belongs on a particular page. Remember, I said the inner margin is half the outer margin, right? So this follows suit nicely. What they're doing is they're dividing with some diagonal lines to get where these certain points would belong. So if we took a spread, right, and we were to draw a big X across the whole page, right, and then we were to draw a diagonal line here to here, we can get what these points are. Okay? Likewise, we can get what the point is at the bottom, right, based on that, where it lines up. So this proportionally feels really good from a graphic design standpoint. Okay? Likewise, we can divide this up even further, right? They're taking it into where you have a column interval here, and they're dividing the columns proportionally as well. So instead of having continuous sized columns, they're actually dividing the columns so that there's two different sizes, but it works nicely for small amounts of text and images. So if you were defaulting into a layout, this is a pretty good one to use. Notice that there is also a few potential for flow lines, right, based on this same layout. And we can go through and kind of do this as a live example too. Multiple column grids contain several spatial intervals. They're nearly endless in their compositional options, right? As soon as you start adding multiple columns, as soon as you start adding grid modules and flow lines, you can basically create anything that you want, right? They're suitable for complex projects. They can create a lot of movement, rhythm, or tension. So here's an example of a 4-column poster, right? We have one large column that has all the text information, and then we have 3 smaller columns. Right? We have several flow lines. We have one that goes strong right across here that divides the title right from the content lecture series. Right? We have a strong line here that divides the lower information, which is blurry. We can't even see what it is, but it's probably like who did the poster and where the address and all that kind of information. Right? So we have those 2 strong flow lines. Right? We have a strong column interval here, smaller column intervals there, and that's part of what's deciding this layout for us and making it a successful poster. Right? Modular grids are extensions of multiple column layouts. We're just adding a lot of flow lines. So you already saw this image, but it's basically dividing up the page into little boxes and then filling a number of boxes with particular images. We'll talk through this a little bit more in detail once we get to InDesign today. If you're going to determine the size of your module, right, you have to think of a couple things. One is how long or how small is the text and how long is a line of text. Okay? We have a tendency in magazines or in newspapers, we write in little columns because it's really quick to read. Right? You just go back and forth and you read really fast. If you imagine an English paper, it takes a little bit longer to read because the line length is longer, right, of the paper. If, however, I took a 12-point font and I started at this edge of the chalkboard and I went to that edge of the chalkboard, it would be really hard to read, right? Because I'd have to stand there and then I'd have to move as I went because it's too long for me to take in one glance, right? So you want to think about that speed and what's the desired line length for a paragraph. So it's font size, how easy is it to read, right? If I did the chalkboard instead and the fonts was this tall, it would be really easy for you to read all the way across. So it's dependent on the size of the text. Right? You want to think also about the smallest size of the photograph or illustration. It doesn't do you any good to create a grid module that's so small that you can't put an image in it. Right? So if you have a certain minimum size of an image, there's no reason to make your grid size smaller than that image. Right? And remember, of course, that each of the above could span multiple modules if they differ. Right? So here's an example table showing how large and small images would look on a single page, right, depending on how we're laying it out. So it kind of gives you a variety of samples as we break it down from big, large images all the way down into small images, an example, text and titles, etc. Right? So modular grids increase the compositional flexibility. Right? The grid modules need to be flexible enough to accommodate the changing content over the course of your project. So part of the reason that I give you a portfolio as your final project in this class is that there are so many different things that you have to figure out how to fit in your portfolio. Right? So your assignment 103, you're going to do a lecture series poster. It's 11 by 17. Right? For your assignment 1, you did a photograph. Chances are it was in a proportion of 4 by 6. Right? It could be 8 by 8, it could be 8 by 10, some size in that realm, which is very, very different from an 11 by 17 in terms of layout and size. So you, in your portfolio, have to figure out how to accommodate this variety of sizes. You might have some drawings that were done on 24 by 36 sheets. How do you fit those into a portfolio? So that kind of flexibility is important, and that's where a modular grid comes in. So there are, of course, alternatives to the modular grids. There's the more organic graphic design techniques. This relies extremely heavily on intuitive understanding of what looks right. Right? It's very hard to teach organic layouts because there isn't a programmatic format for how you would do it. You just have to feel this is working, this isn't working. And so it takes a little bit more trial and error. Okay? It's usually some kind of an evolution based on a fundamental grid or a diagonal grid or something, and then you make some adjustments to it. But again, it's much harder to do well, right? The visual elements then define the architecture of the page. So you're relying on those rather than some underlying format that's keeping things organized, right? Compositional structure is very dominant in this. So remember back to the photography lectures where we were talking about compositional techniques, the rule of thirds, strong diagonals, right, radial compositions, etc. That's where you'd be playing in with something like this, right? So something like this poster here, it really doesn't fall under any particular grid module, right? We have some strong horizontals, we have some strong verticals, but there isn't really I couldn't divide this into column intervals. So it's a much more interpretive understanding of layout. But part of the reason it works is because the elements have a strong hierarchy and they're arranged on the page such that I can follow what I'm supposed to be looking at, right, without the underlying grid. So there's a great example in the layout workbook, which is the recommended book for this class, as just a little bit of extra reading for you. And that is these two pages, which are a very organic layout. They're not based on a particular grid, right? Though they have some relation to one another as you go page to page, right? So there is generally a strong diagonal that's running this way. And so in this image, it's the background. In this page, right, it's the edge of this crop. Okay, but it's still consistent page to page. Likewise, there's a strong diagonal that runs here on both sets of pages. So there's a consistency page to page, even though it's a more organic layout. It's not a traditional grid-based system. So grids always are great for providing a base, but a lot of times the best moments are when you break the grid. And so you guys may have talked about this in your Mondrian Museum projects in 121, where you have this column grid that's laid out. Suddenly you remove one column, or you move one column slightly off center, right? That's where a lot of dynamic stuff can happen in architecture. The problem is that you have to have enough that's based on the grid so that when you break the grid, it stands out. If you break the grid too much, it defeats the purpose of the grid in the first place. So you want to be very careful about where you break it and how you break it, assuming you choose to. Okay? So let's talk a little bit about the interaction of visual elements, right? The most important thing is to develop some kind of a hierarchy in the system, right? So what am I supposed to look at first? What am I supposed to look at second? What am I supposed to look at third, right? If you have a clear focal point that really draws in the eye, it's always the starting point for looking at some piece of graphic design, right? You're going to then add in the subordinate visual elements, right, as it goes down in the hierarchy to get a more in-depth view of whatever it is that you're trying to present, right? Basically, you want to lead the viewer through a logical journey of information, if you can. Okay? If a hierarchy is not established, the eye is going to get distracted, overloaded, and move on. Right? It's going to just, this is too much to take in, I'm going to move on. Right? It's kind of like when you pick up your biology textbook. You're like, oh boy, this is just too much. I got to move on. Right? That's what happens with your eye. So if we look at this poster, for example, National Portfolio Day, as I'm tripping, almost falling, right? Your eye, strong graphic background, certainly. But if you look at the text, right, boom, National Portfolio Day in white, nothing else is in white on the poster, big font, draws your attention, right? Subordinate information, it's at the California College of the Arts, and it's on Saturday, January 19th, 2008. Right? So we're starting here, we're getting this other information, then we get a little bit smaller, I have no idea what it says, then we get a little bit smaller from there, and then we get to a bunch of really tiny stuff. Right? So we're breaking it down into a strong hierarchy so that we know what to look at, then we know what to look at second and third and fourth. Right? This is the rule that I like to use in order to actually think about whether it's a design poster for your 220 project that's going to go up on the wall, or whether it's a lecture series poster or whatever, is what does the poster look like from 12 feet away? What does it look like from 6 feet away? What does it look like from 3 feet away? And what does it look like from 1 foot away? Right? And if you think and design in that context, right, there's a big thing that grabs your attention at 12 feet. Right? And it doesn't have to be 12 feet. It could be 20 feet. I don't know. Right? Those are arbitrary values. But if you stand back and look at this poster, National Portfolio Day in black really stands out, grabs your attention. That would be the 12 foot. right? As you get a little bit closer, you might see the yellow stuff in the background. As you get a little bit closer to the 3 feet, you might just start to read this or a little bit here. And as you get really into the details of it, that's where you're going to read the fine detail, right? So good design has that layering associated with it. So it's the big move, but it's also the fine detail. So how do you get started with hierarchy, right? First thing to do would be to rank the visual elements by importance, right? And sometimes this is easy. You know, what's the title of the poster, right? You're doing a poster on the lecture series. For here, what's the most important thing? The lecture series. So it's something to do with the title, right? And then you work your way backwards. The highest ranking visual elements are in the foreground, right? Subordinate elements will occupy the middle ground and the background as we go forward. Compositional factors, right? These are all the same sorts of things that we've gone through before. Don't forget typography. It's a big one, right? I spent a whole lecture talking about it. It's obviously really important. The hierarchy can often be established in the typography more so than the graphics themselves. Space is something that's really important to talk about, and it's certainly something that you'll cover in the world of architecture. It is the space that's around the objects, right? A lot of times we refer to it as negative space. It's the opposite of the active elements, and things need breathing room for us to be able to read them, right? It's the visual contrast. It contributes to the effective ordering system, right? Empty space tends to bring elements alive, right? If you focus on the negative space, you'll have better positive space, right? So something like this, right? The vacancy of this space is really important. It gives us a place to start. We understand that we're supposed to start reading right there at the end, right? As opposed to over here at the chopped off end. So it's the space that gives us the clue where to start looking, right? And you do it by intuition. When you look at that, that's where you know to start reading, right? Because of that space. There's a reason that when we establish paragraphs, you're writing your English paper, there's an indent at the beginning of the paragraph because we know that's where we're supposed to start. Right? It's that space that really makes a big difference. Right? It's really important for the accessibility and navigation of the eye to have space around pieces. Right? It directs the eye to the positive visual areas of the space. Right? We want to group elements together to provide a focal point. We want to, if we were to center an object, it's basically minimizing the space around it because we're not seeing it. Let me draw an example of this. Right? So let's say I had a page, something like this, right? And I had something to put on the page. If I put the thing on the page in exactly the center of the page, it's not very exciting. Right? There's nothing around it that's making me want to look at this image. It's just a big frame. Okay? If, however, I change that and I put it here, right? And it's a much more dynamic layout because I have space around that particular object. It's totally different than having it centered. So think about pulling it off. It's kind of like when we were in the photography lectures and I was saying if you take a picture of somebody and it's centered in the image, it's kind of blah. If you put that person on one of the thirds, it becomes a dynamic image. Right? Same thing happens in graphic design. So place something off center, right? It's asymmetrical and has a little bit more space around it. The other factor that I should mention, right? We're talking about these layouts. Even if I followed the rule of thirds and I did this, it's too much space. Right? This is not an effective layout. We need a little bit more content for that. So you want to think about that. So too much space is bad as well. Scale can also be used to establish hierarchy. We see this a lot in typography, right? Large text, first hierarchical item, right? Smaller text, second step. Smaller text, third step, right? Sometimes it can be with visual elements, right? These could be in the background. The large dancer here, primary element, right? Smaller little white figure is the secondary element. So we're working our way down in scale. Right? Quantity is another important thing, and that is that too many elements is too much clutter and they lack detail. Too few elements and there's not enough information. So it's this fine balance. Right? Make sure that every element that you put into the page has a specific purpose. Right? And you can use one of two methods to do this, subtractive or additive. You can start with the very basic of the minimum of what I have and add one piece at a time, or you can throw everything that you have on the page and start pulling it off as it looks too ugly, right? And so this, one of the best illustrations of this is people start to lay out their portfolio pages, right? So let's say I'm going to do a spread, something like this, and I start to lay out my portfolio page. OK, well, I'm going to put my first image here. That looks pretty good. And the second one, we'll say, is going to be divided into a couple images like that. And I might have a little bit of text here. OK, it's looking like a reasonable layout. And then they say, it's a little plain. Let me add some lines. All right, so I'll put a line across here. And then maybe I'll put a line over here, and maybe one that goes down here, and one that goes over here. And maybe I'll put a block over here with a number in it. And all of a sudden, this starts to become very, very muddled and cluttered, right? Because you have too much stuff on that particular page, right? So this is a lot about editing out. I don't need all these lines. Let's get rid of these. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of these. Let's get rid of that. And go with a small number in the corner, 1, like that. But yeah, maybe this bold line here, maybe that looks OK. So we'll keep it, right? Or maybe we'll shade the whole top of the page. OK, that's reasonable, right? So you want to work through what the fine balance is of too much versus not enough information. Right? Orientation and position, right? Strong contrasts lead to a hierarchy. Okay? In this example here, right, we have a lot of horizontal text, lots of horizontal, and then we have a very strong vertical that's separate from the horizontal. And that happens to be right where the text reflects. So it provides a focal point for the image. So we're using the background image of the face and the edge of the arm here to provide a cue for where the horizontal elements break down. So you want to think carefully about how the background corresponds to the foreground. Right? Diagonals are great here too. Right? You can also set this up in some kind of perspective or spatial dimension, or you have things in front of other things, and that composition ends up establishing a hierarchy. So the things in the foreground are more important than the things that are in the background, right? And so it's kind of the 3D view. Typography. We spent a whole lecture last class on typography. Don't forget to pay attention to that when you're doing graphic design layout. The text is as important as the other visual elements, right? So you want to give as much attention as you can to that. You want to think at the large scale and at the small scale. Remember to squint at the text and see how black it's appearing in contrast, because a block of text is almost the same as a visual element. You want to make sure that they work well together. Color is also important. It's going to provide visual interest or emphasize specific elements, right? You can use a comprehensive color palette, or you can use just 1 or 2 colors. You want to consider the tone and what color. We're going to spend a whole lecture later on in the semester talking about colors and color choice and how you choose one color over another. You want to think about that when you're doing your graphic design layouts. So one of the good examples of color that can really succeed nicely in the world of architectural design, I'll use my thesis as an example. When my whole thesis group was getting ready, there were 10 of us that were going to present. A thesis presentation at Berkeley is a 45-minute deal, and you get 24 feet of wall space to put up your drawings and whatever as part of the thesis project. So you do a huge amount of work, and it generally involves a week worth of actually setting up the final presentation and getting it to look right and whatever. Anyway, when you have all of this information up on the wall, you need some kind of a visual cue that can tie everything together. And so one of the things that my group did, and we each had our individual thesis, but we all spent time thinking about what color identifies our particular work, and how can we make sure that there might be, all our drawings might be in black and white, but there's one splash of color in every drawing that ties together the most important piece. And so in my thesis, it was red, and so every drawing that I had little tiny red elements that tied the whole thing together. And so it didn't involve a lot of color or really fancy renderings. It just had to do with those small little touches that tied everything together. So you can get away with just 1 or 2 colors, and you can end up with a really great layout, right? Graphic shapes and linear elements, these are the kinds of things that I was talking about on the board when I was drawing that example. Lines, horizontals, verticals, etc. It's really easy to go overboard such that they take over the role of primary content instead of secondary or supportive content. And so you just want to make sure that you're not overdoing it. At the same time, they can really give a cue as to where you're supposed to start reading. Strong graphic element, the plus sign, right? There's the critical part that I'm looking at, right? So they can be very effective. You just want to be careful with how much you use. So in review, you as the designer, most importantly, need to create some kind of a hierarchy of elements, right? You need to order and control the design to achieve the correct message that you're trying to send, right? You're going to use contrast to establish the focal areas, whether it's hierarchy contrast or whether it's a diagonal against a horizontal. Something's going to define where we're supposed to work. Maybe it's the negative space against the positive space, right? And you're going to use compositional factors to support your overall design. Okay? I'm going to show you a variety of images here. This is a portfolio type book, and I think this is a good set of examples because it shows you kind of a consistency across number of pages with very different layouts so that you can really tell that this belongs as a body of work, not just an individual page. Okay? So if we start to look at this, we have a certain column interval. We have a flow line that runs across the top of the page, right? And as we move on to the next page, right, we have a consistency. There is a flow line right up here. That stays in the same place, right? This now spans 3 of the columns, right? We have a consistency here as we move forward, right? That piece of text that was on this side is now reflected and put over on that side, right? This is falling in the same margin here as it is on the other side. So there's this flow line is connected to that flow line. So you can see how they are consistent page to page, right? We move forward to the next page. The flow lines are consistent, right? The text shrinks in this case, but the background image, the yellow here, is consistent with the first page that we saw. Right? So there's a consistency page after page where the flow line is and how these elements interact together. Another example there. OK. So we're going to move, and I'm going to start in the InDesign portion. So bear with me while I switch over. OK, so we're going to continue with part 2. And this is a little bit more of the programmatic stuff that we're going to do in the background in InDesign. So I'm going to go ahead and open up InDesign. I went to All Programs, and I'm going to go to Adobe Design Standard CS6, and I'm going to open Adobe InDesign CS6. OK, so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to open a new document. So I'm going to say Create New Document, assuming that. There we go. And I want this to be 4 by 6, right? So I'll say 4, and I'm going to type, oops, 4. Helps if I have the ability to type here. 4 inches by 6 inches. And I'll go ahead and say OK. Right? I'm doing it laid out. Oh, I didn't adjust the margins when I created it. So let me go back to Layout, Margins and Columns. And I'll set these at 0. And I'll say OK. That was my mistake. It's available when you go to create a new document, and you get this little, right down here at the margins is where I would set it. I just forgot to set it. Right? If you miss it, you can come back and go to the Edit, Margins and Columns, and you can change it there. Okay? So here's my general layout. Okay? And we talked a little bit about kind of establishing a hierarchy on the page and doing a graphic layout, etc. I'm going to go ahead and walk you through the spread example so that you can see that kind of layout, but then we'll also go through a variety of other things. So right now I have Essentials set up, and over here on the right column I have something called Pages, which you haven't dealt with before, right? But we have the ability to create multi-page documents, and we also have the ability to create masters, which are background imagery, and we'll cover masters a little bit more in depth. But I'm going to go ahead in Pages and create a couple new pages. So I now have Pages 2 and Pages 3, right? And there's a little New Pages icon here. Unfortunately, the margins and columns didn't adjust on these 2 pages, so let me go ahead and fix those as well. Then go to Margins and Columns and go to 0. I'll say OK. OK, so now I have these two facing pages, and I'm going to set up my graphics so that I establish this layout for these postcards. OK, so because I want some of the stuff that I'm going to draw not to show up when I ultimately print, I'm going to come over here to the Layers window. And this works a lot like Photoshop layers, right, where the topmost item is on top of the other items. And I'm going to create a new layer, and then I'll start working on layer 1 because it's the lowest one. And I'm also going to right-click on the layer and say Layer Options, and I'm going to uncheck the box for Print Layer, right? Which basically will mean that this, whatever I draw on this layer isn't going to print, which is good. Okay, so I have this, and I'll rename this. Let me rename it Layout, and I'll say OK. OK, so I'm on the Layout layer. It's highlighted in blue. Now I'm going to come over here to the Line tool, and I'm going to go ahead and draw a line that goes from this corner down to this corner, like that. So I get that line. And then I'll draw a line that goes from this corner up to this corner, like that. Okay. Then I'll draw a line from this corner that goes to the middle of the page right there. And I'll draw a line that goes from the middle of the page right here down to right here. Right, does this look familiar thus far? Right, if we oh, I can't. I don't know that I can bring it back up for you. Okay, so now, right, if I want to start to establish, let's say I'm going to drag a guide down from the ruler here. Say that I want the top of my text to be right here. Right, something like that. Let's go down an inch. Let's go 1.5 inches. Like that. I'm starting to establish where the content on my page can actually show up based on these guides. So I have this here. And now, if I start to think about content, right, I can see where these intersect. Come down to the bottom here. Like that. So now I have an active area of the page. I've defined my margins. So for example, if I was going to place an image, right, I could elect to place the image right here. And, oh, sorry, not supposed to use key shortcuts. I went to File and then Place, which is Control-D. And then let me go ahead and pick an image off my flash drive. Right-click, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. Right? And so we can see that that is now starting to be established, right, as one of my kind of image size. I've got a nice dynamic amount of space around it. Feels good from a layout standpoint. So this isn't exactly what I want just yet, but I wanted to show you how I'm deriving that piece of information. Right? So let's divide this up a little bit further. Oops, go to plus. Right? So I have that. I'm going to divide a line right here that goes across. And I'll divide a line that goes right here and across. So now I'm going to start to establish some text, right, in contrast to this. So what I asked you to do today was to create a program about the DVC architecture program, right? Some kind of a little postcard, advertising it. Could be anything that you want relating to it. If you need additional information, you can go to the DVC architecture website. I think it's dvcarchitecture.com. Yep. And so you can look this up. There's information about prior lecture series, what's happened before, etc. We can go back and we can look at a variety of information. Okay. So if you wanted additional information, you could do it. So let's say I want to start talking about the DVC architecture program. So if I'm looking at this page, right, I'm going to switch, because I'm going to start creating actual live content that I want to show up, to layer 2, because that's my content, not my layout. Remember, my layout isn't going to show up. I'm going to start with layer 2, and I'm going to start to divide up this page. Right? So let's go ahead and let's create a frame. And I'm going to create a frame that's right here to right here. Okay? And I'm going to place in something, some kind of an image. So I'll go to File and then Place. And I'm not sure what I want to place in yet. So we'll place this. Go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. Right. I'm going to double click on it. Oops. Nope, sorry. Black arrow to select it, double click, and I'm going to drag it over because it's not quite set up correctly. Okay. So I have that established. Now I'm going to put some text in. Right. So let's go ahead and create a text box here. And I'll go ahead and say DVC architecture. So we want to think about font, of course. And so I might pick a different font. And we want to think about size. Right? So I'm going to increase my size. Something like that. And I'm actually going to move this above this line here. And then I'm going to create a subtext underneath it. Go ahead here. Let's see, DVC architecture. What should we talk about? We should talk about courses offered fall 2015. Right, so I used a specialty font there. Let's see if I can get something different. Let's see here. Make this a little bit smaller. In contrast, we'll pull this up like that. Right? So if I want to see what this starts to look at without the stuff in the background, I can turn off that layout layer. And I can also go to the View menu, and I can turn on, under Screen Mode, I can go to Preview instead of Normal, and it will make it look like it's just a blank page, no boxes around the content. So it's a good way of checking how this works. So let me go back to Screen Mode, go back to Normal. I have my boxes. I'll turn my layout back on. Okay. I think this needs to be wider, so I'm going to pull that across to there so that it extends beyond the margin a little bit. Oops. That. I also think it probably needs to be taller. So let me go ahead and pull this up. And I'm going to right-click, go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, something like that. Pull that over. That. And then I might come down here in this lower part and start to write about what the courses are that are offered. Let me take this, and I'm going to copy it and paste it. And we'll pull it down here. Like that. Let's make this font smaller. 8 point, and it would be 5. Okay, so sorry, I was just typing it. It's all there. It just needs to come down. Right? So I said RT 135 to 136, and this should be 137. Oops. 137. Right? And so I'm starting to establish that. If I go back to go to View, Screen Mode, Preview, right? We can see how stuff looks when it's gone. This is probably too big, so let's shrink it down so that it's a smaller element. Like that. Looks like I missed a space. Right, and maybe this ends up needing to be 2 columns. So let me go ahead. I'm going to copy this. I could actually copy and put all the classes in, but we're going to just kind of fake it for right now. Oops. Close down. Right, and let's take this. I'm going to copy and I'm going to paste. I'll put it right next to it here. Right, and so I'm establishing the list of classes that would be there. So again, I'm making it up. Okay. This maybe needs to go a little bit higher. Right, so I use that as a base, and then I'm starting to lay this out, right, as an actual graphic design piece. Okay. What happens, however, right? I'm going to come back up to here. If you want to create multiple pieces, right? So let's say that I want some squares. Right. I'm going to let me change my units to inches. Right. I know this is a 4x6 card, so let's say I wanted to divide it into 3 columns. We'd maybe do about 1 3/4 inches each. Right. So I'm just going to I selected my frame. I'm going to click, and this brings up a rectangle dialog box that I can actually specify a value. So I can say 1.75 by 1.75, and I'll say OK. There's a frame. Oh, that's too many. It's actually 1.25, I think. And so let me take this image, and I'm going to Control-C to copy it and Control-V to paste it. Right. Oh, and let me switch back into my view screen mode normal, so I can actually see my frames. There we go. So there's 1, there's 2, and there's 3. Let me go ahead and paste 4, 5, and 6. Okay. So I put these pieces in, and you'll notice that as you start to drag these images around, right, they try to line up with each other. Right, so I get those little green horizontals, and they kind of line up with each other. This is a great feature that's part of the Creative Suite. So it can help me kind of line it up. Furthermore, if I get close to a center line, it'll give me a little pink layout, okay, where I get kind of a line that will snap to the center. You can also see that I can get to where my spacing, see if I can get it to show up. There's little green lines. Maybe you can't even see it on the screen. Right? But you'll get the hang of kind of moving around. Those are the align tools that are just working in the background. I can, however, bring up my alignment tools. If I go to Window, Object and Layout, and go to Align, right, this will bring up this little floating palette here that will let me align objects. So for example, I have this object in position. Let's say I want this object to line up with that object. If I select both of the objects, and then I'm going to click 1 extra time on the object that I want to stay in place, right, I can then use the Align objects to say Align to the left, and it'll move 1 object over to the left. Okay. Likewise, I can select this object, hold down Shift, select that object. This is the key object. That's the one that's not going to move, and I can say Align to the left there. Right. Likewise, hold down Shift, key object, Align to the left, and it aligned to the left. Notice that it didn't correct the up and down spacing. It just aligned to the left. Okay. Likewise, I could take these 3 objects, click on this as the key object, and say Align all 3 to the top, and all 3 are then going to be aligned on the top. Okay. I have some other options here, and let me go ahead and create a couple more of these. This is just copy and paste. Okay, so let's say that I have these objects, right? These 2 overlap. This one has a different spacing than this one. Okay. Let's say that I want this object and this object to be evenly spaced between this object and that object. Okay. If I select all of my objects, oops, looks like I moved one by accident here. Okay, let me select all of these. Right. I can come over here to distribute objects. Right? And so I can distribute objects along their centers, which is the second one over. And when I do that, it's going to take the 2 middle objects and make them evenly spaced between the 2 outer objects. Okay, which is really convenient for getting the space even, because I don't know what the space is in between these without doing some math. Okay? So that's really convenient. The other thing that I can do is I can say distribute objects, use spacing. Let's say I wanted it to be 1/8 of an inch, 0.125, right? I'll keep one object as my key object, and then I'll align to the centers. Oh, hold on a second. I want to distribute spacing, not instead. Let me do distribute spacing here. Sorry, it's down here. Use spacing 0.125, right? And distribute spacing between the objects. It's then going to give it a specific value in between the objects. So distribute objects is take the two far sides and distribute in between, right? Distribute spacing is I want even spacing between my objects. So now that I have these objects put in place, right, I can take these three, for example, place this as the key object, align to the top, and they'll jump up. These three objects here, key object, align to the top, and these objects here, key object, align to the top. So I'm working with these align tools to create this layout. Okay? So I now have this layout set up. I have an even 1/8 of an inch gap. So I have 3 columns, right? I have some flow lines here. I don't quite meet the top and I don't quite meet the bottom, so I'm okay with it for right now. Okay? So let's say that I went to place an image, right? And so I could select this one and I can go to File and then Place. And I could place an image in here. And let me go to Display Performance, or excuse me, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, right? And we'd see the image in that one square. Okay? Let's say that I wanted to change my grid and I wanted this to span 4 of these little modules, right? I can do a couple things. One, I can just go ahead and delete these, right? So we can go through delete, delete, delete. Let's pull this one down so it's there and there. And then I can go ahead and place this object. So let me go to File, Place, Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, and now it fits in that space. Okay? But what happens, instead of doing it like that, what happens if I wanted an image to span across these grid modules but not be a continuous image, right? I wanted the gaps to stay put. What I can do is I could select them, right? So let me select these 4 right there. And let me go to Object, Paths, Make Compound Path. Okay, so once again, that's Objects, Paths, Make Compound Path. And you see how right now each of those individual squares has an X in it? Okay? When I select Make Compound Path, the X is going to stop spanning the individual squares and span the whole group of objects. Okay? So now I can take this object, I can go to File and then Place. Let me see here. And I can place an image. Let's go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. And it's going to span across those 4 as separate little blocks. Okay? So I have the ability to do a variety of layout techniques, right, depending on what I'm trying to do. Okay? So that's spanning across. If I wanted an image to span across these 3, once again, I'd select all 3, and I go to Object, Compound Path, Make Compound Path, or excuse me, Object, Paths, Make Compound Path. The X changes, and then I can go ahead and place another image. And let me go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, and I can end up with that layout. So you see how I can kind of work through that layout? Okay. By the way, this is written up. If we go to the Digital Tools site, the Align tools here that I talk about are there. Image spanning frames, 2.9 is what I just did, where we have multiple frames and we make it span, so you can follow that. Right? We'll get to text as a frame, and then transparency. This is also something that people ask frequently. Okay? So let's go ahead and we'll do the transparency here. Right? I'm going to take these 3 objects right here. Right? And I don't have it showing here, so I'm going to go, instead of Essentials, I'm going to go to Advanced. I think it'll show up as Advanced. Right? Yeah, good. And with this selected, I'm going to go to Effects. Right? If I wanted all of them to be transparent, right, I can just change the opacity. So I could say, let me go 50%, for example, and I'm getting transparency. I probably should place something in the background so that you guys can see that this is working. Let me think here. I'm trying to think what I have as a background. Oh, I probably have a texture. Hold on a second. Let me grab something here. Sorry, I'm just trying to get something to go in the background so you can see this. We go to File and then Place. We go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally. Now this right now is in front of my objects. If I right-click on it and say, oh, excuse me, I have to select it, right-click, and say Arrange, Send to Back, it'll send behind the rest of the object. So anyway, this one here, I just adjusted the opacity. As I pull this slider down, more and more of the background is going to show through, so you can kind of see how that opacity is working. Okay, so let me go ahead and bring this back up. Okay, and now if I click on this little FX down below, I can come here and I can say a gradient feather. Okay, and the gradient feather, when I pull it up, is going from solid to transparent, and it's a linear gradient feather. So if I say OK, you'll see that it's starting as a solid image and it's fading out to nothing. Okay? If I go back to that gradient feather, right, and I change where this point is, I can keep more of it solid before it goes to transparent. So I'll say OK. See how it's more solid and then it goes to transparent. Right? So this is the strategy for dealing with transparency if you want transparency to be there. The other thing that sometimes happens is people want text to be shown as objects or place objects inside text. So let me go ahead and I'm going to create another new page. And let me get rid of those margins. All right. And so let me go ahead and go to the text tool. And I'm going to write some text. Okay. And let's change the font here. And let's change the size. I need it to be even bigger than that. Okay, so let's say I have something like that. Let's make it bigger than that. All right, so let's say I have this text, this DVC. So I, of course, can select the text, and you've done this before, and I can change the color of the text by clicking on this little T, and I can change it to be, I don't know, some ugly color, right? But what if I want to put an image where the text is? Right? I can use this text as a frame. When I do this operation, however, I won't be able to go back and edit the text. So if you have a spelling error or something, you can't correct it after the fact. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to have the text selected. I'm going to go to Type, Create Outlines, and it's going to convert from a live text to being something that has basically an object, right? A frame. I can then use this object. I can go to File and then Place, and I can pick a texture, and it's then going to put the texture into the text. Right, this is another thing that people tend to ask me for. So let me go to Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, right, and now the DVC, instead of being, let's go to Preview mode here, View, Screen Mode, Preview, right, instead of being the text, the black text, it now has this image behind it, right, which is another thing that people like to do. Yes, I'd love to do it again. So, right, once again, we'll say DVC. And let me go ahead and make this larger. I'm not going to use Papyrus. We talked about that. And let's go ahead and make this 150. All right, so it's text. Okay, I'm going to go up to Type. I'm going to go to Create Outlines. Once I've done that, I'm going to go to File and then Place. I'll pick my texture. and then it'll fit inside those. So we go to fitting, fill frame proportionally, and there it is. Okay? Now, I can take this and I can apply the gradient to it. So I can say, let's add the gradient feather so that it fades from being solid to not so solid, and I can fade out a particular piece. So you see how I can do a lot with a variety of pieces. So you are not, however, limited to the regular rectangles, right? You obviously see that I can, let me switch back into my normal screen mode. You see that in this instance, right, I have DVC and I use that as my frame. I've been doing rectangles as a frame. If I click and hold, I can do an ellipse or I can do a polygon, right? So I could do a circular frame and place something into that circular frame, right? But you're seeing now that basically any object that I can create, I can use as a frame. So I could take it one step further and go to the pen tool right here, and I could draw a custom object. That. And I can go to File and then Place. Pick something different. Fitting. Fill frame proportionally. Oops. Right? And I can make that. The neat thing about this is once you've created it, you can use the direct select tool. The white arrow, we'll cover this more in a bit. And I could select an individual point on my object, and I can adjust it, and I'll get more or less of the image back. Right? So I have a lot of flexibility there. The image does not have to be angular. Right? If I use the pen tool and I click and hold, I'll get a tangent line, and I can draw basically any shape that I can come up with. Like that, and then I can go back to File, Place, and I can place a particular image into this, like that. Okay, so you guys get the idea, right? Basically, anything you can create, you can do in InDesign. So a lot of these things, if I wanted to place text in a complex image, right, I can do the same thing. It works just like an image. So I can take that Word document from last time and place it right into the diagonal. So any shape is doable. Okay, so we've done compound paths. We've spanned across frames. Let me just review that here, right, so that I'm back to this shape. And let's say I want to create one more shape. That. All right, let me take this shape, and I'm going to hold down Shift and that shape. And I'm going to go up to Object, Paths, Make Compound Path. They become one shape. Then I'll go to File and Place. I'll drop the image. See how it spans both frames? We'll right-click and say Fitting, Fill Frame Proportionally, and now the one image spans across both of those frames. Okay, so the same principles work no matter what the objects are within InDesign. In this particular case, these shapes still have a border around them. So if I wanted the black border to go away, I'd need to come select the stroke here, and then to get rid of it, you select this little swatch and say Apply None. And then I wouldn't have the black border around it. Okay? So really the best thing at this point for you to do is to come up with your own design and try to figure out how to do it. And as you have questions, you can ask me. Okay? I do have to check really quick about the computers with Chuck, but I believe that I'm going to have to kick all of you out at 10:30 today. Darn, you get out early, right? Because I have to do a changeover on some of the computers before my next class. So I have to check and make sure that that's still going to happen, and we're going to unlock the computers and whatever. So I'll make sure that I let you know, but I wanted to give you a little bit of warning that you may be getting out of here a little early. Okay? Are there any questions? No? Good.